Good evening, everybody. This is Ed Mann with Provident. I'm joined tonight with our marketing director, Sam Tallarico.
Hi.
We're going to give everything another minute or two, and then we're going to get started with this evening's presentation. Make sure if we have any latecomers. I hope all of you who are listening are safe and sound. Terrible flooding in Tennessee. Let's keep those folks in our prayers. The Northeast got a lot of rain over the weekend. Let's keep those folks in our prayers as well.
Yes. All right, we'll wait till 7:02 and then we can get started.
All right.
I imagine more people will roll in throughout the next couple minutes. All right.
Okay.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name's Sam Tallarico. I'm the marketing director at Provident. We have a great learning series tonight with our host, Chief Ed Mann, Director of Training and Education at Provident. If you have any questions while watching this presentation tonight, please type them in the Q&A box. We're going to have a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Then at the very end of this webinar, we have a quick 5-question survey. And we'd really appreciate we'd appreciate all your feedback and thoughts on tonight. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ed and I'll be back for questions.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Look, folks, we decided to try an evening session with this, especially given most of our clients, most of the people that we insure are a large number of them are volunteers. So we thought we'd try an evening session tonight to see if we might draw more people to the program. And we may try it again later if it works well tonight. Look, folks, we're going to talk about cancer in the fire service, but I want you to understand something. I'm not going to spend a lot of time dealing on the science or the medical research that's been done. Simply stated, the problem of cancer in the fire service is very well stated and very well documented by our friends in the scientific and medical community. Now's the time for us to take action to reduce the risk. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions throughout the program. And as Sam indicated, use the question and answer feature to send your questions. We'll attempt to answer all of them. If we can't get to all of them, we'll get answers to you via email in the days that follow the webinar. So, of course, Providence hosting these webinars. And I want to go through a couple of slides so you understand who Provident is and what it is we do for the emergency services. So Provident got its start in 1902 in the Pittsburgh area as an independent insurance agency. And in 1928, the folks that were at Provident decided that volunteer fire departments needed some customized accident and health insurance policies. In many states, they refer to them as firemen's relief policies. Today, we provide service to volunteer combination career firefighters and emergency medical responders with a multitude of programs. Provident's been named the top insurance workplace by the Insurance Business America magazine for the last 3 years. And my understanding is we're in contention to make that 4 years in a row. So as I mentioned earlier, we have an accident and health insurance policy for our clients. And if you're an accident and health client or you have our accident and health insurance policy, you're entitled to use our first responder assistance program, you and your immediate family. And while I'm on the topic, I just want to mention that here in central Pennsylvania, a firefighter involved with a fire department not far from me committed suicide over the weekend. So I'm saying to you folks, I know it's not part of the cancer program. If you need to talk to somebody, things aren't going well for you, reach out and talk to somebody, get some help. We also offer a 24-hour accidental death and dismemberment insurance policy, which covers you and your members 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They may be doing something that's not even related to the fire department, and they would be able to get benefit from that policy. We have group term life, a critical illness and cancer policy that I'll talk about near the end of the program, and then our Fire Plus property and casualty insurance, which would also give your organization and your members access to our Fire Plus online training academy, which is managed by Fire Rescue One. So with that, we're going to move into the meat of the program, the fire service cancer risk reduction presented, and I'm going to talk about good, better, and best practices. So as promised at the beginning of the program, I'm not going to dwell a lot on the science. Here's a study that some results of a study that were done in 2010 by Dr. Robert Daniels from NIOSH. If you're a firefighter, you already have a 9% higher risk of being diagnosed with cancer than the general population. Firefighters have a 14% higher risk of dying from cancer than the general population. Folks, it's well documented by the scientific community. It's been shown by the medical community. The rates of cancer in our business are greater than they are for the general population. Cancer is most responsible for the higher risk: respiratory, GI cancers, kidney cancers. Additional risk for firefighters: you're 2.02 times higher at risk at having testicular cancer if you're a firefighter. And I'm not going to go through all these. You can see the slides. Another one that I want to make note of is in some recent studies, there's been a lot of discussion about elevated cancer rates with women in our business related to breast cancer. Just a quick look here. If you look at some of these known carcinogens, if you look down the left of this column, these are things that you can be exposed to at any number of fires you go to. For example, arsenic's known to cause kidney, liver, and prostate cancer. Something that we're all exposed to on a pretty regular basis is diesel exhaust. Diesel exhaust is known to cause lung, bladder, and esophageal cancer. Formaldehyde that you find in OSB, nasal pharynx cancer, and leukemia. Vinyl chlorides are known to cause liver cancer. The bottom line is, here's just a small list of things that we're exposed to as firefighters that it's known in the scientific community to cause cancer in humans. Some other studies that were done: soot. How many of you have ever gone to a fire, especially a working fire, and you come out of the fire and you weren't covered in soot? We're always covered in soot. Soot is known as a group 1 carcinogen, and at the top of the cancer, a top cancer causing agent. Not only do we get it sucked in through the body on our skin and our faces and under our gear, the biggest thing to remember is we're absorbing a lot of this stuff through our skin directly into our bloodstreams. For every 5 degrees increase in your skin temperature, there's a 400% increase in skin absorption. Now think about that. Here in central Pennsylvania of late, it's been 85, 90 degrees with humidity at 85, 90%. So you're already hot before you ever get to the firehouse to go to the call. Your pager trips, you make the dash to the firehouse, you put your turnout gear on, and now you're heated up even more. You get to the fire's in the attic of a residential home. The chief gives you the order to stretch an 1 3/4 line to the attic. Again, you're increasing your body temperature. Now you make your way to the attic to put a hit on the fire. You've increased your body temperature even more. You put the fire out, you come back outside. None of us instantly cool down. I don't know about you, but I seem to sweat even more and get hotter yet after I come out of the fire before I get my gear off. The entire time, all of that soot and those byproducts of combustion are being absorbed through your skin directly into your system. So I'm going to show you a video here. It's about a 5-minute long video. A friend of mine, Alberto Cabon Martinez from the University of Miami, and I want to give a shout out to Florida. Florida has a firefighter health and safety coalition that was funded partially from money from the governor's office to the University of Miami. And then the Florida firefighters have created a health and safety coalition. So Florida's really been on top of this cancer issue for the last several years, with a lot of help from the University of Miami and the Florida Firefighter Health and Safety Coalition. So without further ado, I'll run the video.
So this is super invisible powder that's used actually for theft detection and cash, but one of the things we're trying to simulate is pretending that this is black soot, just the same type of soot that comes off combustible and burning materials you would encounter in a fire incident response. The initiative actually came to us right from the Palm Beach County Fire Rescue Department. They were very interested in understanding about how what they did for work was impacting their health, specifically how maybe being a firefighter or an EMS responder may increase their risk for cancer. One of the things we were trying to do today is figure out, is there a way we can demonstrate how maybe cancerous materials are transferred from a fire incident response back to the fire station and personal vehicle. And so today was really a teaching exercise and a scientific exercise of trying to see how we demonstrate where soot, represented by this invisible dye, might be transferring from when they go to respond to a fire and come back to the fire station. So the goal today was trying to be able to identify, can we feasibly show how soot is transferred from a fire incident response back to their truck and back to the fire station. As you start going through the different scenarios of post-decon into the fire engine, back into the bunk, into the restrooms, back here to the coffee table, it starts becoming less visible to the naked eye. But that powder that is invisible over chronic exposure could be potentially causing cellular changes that we just don't know about yet. And hopefully through some of our studies we can start identifying those changes. It was really an eye-opening experience for us because I anticipated, some demonstration of how much dye would transfer. I didn't realize the breadth and scope of how much dye would spread within the different scenarios that we were shooting in, as well as continue to transfer on after the first fire engine truck. So for me, it was very impressive to see even some of the invisible dye transfer onto the bunks where they're sleeping at night. Even if it's a smaller quantity, you could imagine that low-dose chronic exposure of this dye might be potentially increasing the risk over time. We filmed today in the EMS's personal vehicle. You could easily see even fainter wisps of plume of dye on the ceiling as well as on the seat that were not direct contacts, but were physically visible on this, suggesting that the particulate moves around. So you might not visibly see soot, and in this case we got to see a dye, but that could potentially be increasing your cancer risk. The firefighter works as a fomite and is transferring, carcinogen from where their place of work back to their personal home. So we had an opportunity to have a child with us today to be able to demonstrate maybe what happens in passing some of that soot using a soccer ball. So we were able to have a child play with one of the EMS firefighters with that soccer ball, and we were able to see a second-degree transfer of this invisible dye, i.e. the soot, transfer from the EMS to the soccer ball and to the child. activities that I hope arises from this video that we're producing is that firefighters are a little bit more cognizant about how hygiene is a very important aspect, and decontamination is an important aspect of post-incident fire response, because it makes them a little bit more aware of not only of the soot that they bring back into the fire station, but also what they might be taking to their personal homes and sharing with their families through secondary and tertiary contact of this soot on their own person. And I hope that the firefighters see that as a way of creating an opportunity for awareness and discussion of how we improve hygiene and decontamination within the fire service.
So before we move on to the next video, I just want to point out a couple of things. Before I became intimately aware of all these cancer issues 5-6 years ago, when I look back over my 45 plus years in this business, and I think of the number of times as a volunteer firefighter that I came home from a call at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, knowing I had to get up at 6 o'clock to go to work. And I took my clothes off and laid them at the foot of the bed on top of the quilt holder that we have. And I may have washed my hands and my face, and then I crawled back into bed and rolled over and told my wife I was back in bed, and obviously put my cold feet against her legs, not having any idea of what I may have been bringing home to my own family. When I think back to the days when I was doing structural burns as an instructor nearly every weekend, and we'd start burning in March and burn through November, and I never washed my turnout gear that entire period of time. I may have let it hang out somewhere and air off. I may have took a garden hose to it to get some debris off of it, but I never really washed it till the end of the burn season. And I used to carry it in the trunk of the Ford Escort, and you'd roll the windows up, and the next day you get in and you could smell that smoke all through the car. And I just wonder, knowing what I know now, I wonder what I may have exposed my family to. My point is, now we know. And what I'm saying to you is do what you can to reduce the risk, not only to you, but the cross-contamination to your family. The next video I'm going to show you was funded by the Washington State Department of Labor and Industry in cooperation with the Washington State Council of Firefighters. And I'm sure many of you will recognize the voice of this video.
The big thing for me now that I've had cancer for a while, I realized that, life's precious. And all of us see it every day in the service where somebody's in a fire, auto accident, medical. People, pass away every day.
This is what firefighters do. You respond to all sorts of emergencies. You help people in their darkest hour at their time of greatest need. You fight tooth and nail to save lives, protect property, and stabilize incidents. But as you respond to alarms, you run across some pretty dangerous situations. When it comes to fires, you train obsessively to mitigate the obvious hazards. But it's sometimes easy to forget the big danger that lurks everywhere, at every fire, big or small. Carcinogens. These chemicals and particulates are everywhere at a fire incident, and firefighters are exposed to them at every stage of response, suppression, and overhaul. It is impossible to completely eliminate the threat, but there are actions you can take to minimize the risks to your families, your coworkers, and to yourselves. That's what this video is about. Changing how firefighters operate on the fire ground so you can all live long, cancer-free lives.
As a new recruit, as a new guy that's been hired, you've got a 30-year career. Man, make it that 30 years, that's the best, that'll be the best time you've had in your life. And I would also, on the flip side, and this is even more important for those guys my age that are gonna retire, I mean, you've put in 30 years. Do 30 more healthy.
So, what are these best practices? Well, they're simple, cost-effective procedures all firefighters can do to minimize exposure to carcinogens and long-term cancer risk. Let's start with the easiest and most foolproof. Limit your exposure to the diesel exhaust that comes out of the fire apparatus. This means shutting down rigs when not in use and using exhaust ventilation systems whenever possible. Another simple step towards your healthy future is to wear full PPE and SCBA while fighting fire. Whether it's a structure fire, car fire, or dumpster fire, you need to stay protected from initial attack through overhaul. What about when you come out of a fire? When it comes to carcinogen exposure, this is one of the most potentially dangerous times. As time allows, the pump operator should set up a wet or dry decontamination station, depending on the weather. Proper decon starts with removing all of the debris and contaminants while still on air. If it's below freezing, remove those carcinogenic byproducts with a dry brush. Particulates will still be airborne, and you need to leave the decon area before doffing your gear. On warmer days, a thorough spray down from a designated decon hose line stretched from the attack engine is the best method. Decon each other. Don't expose the pump operator to the contaminants. Stay connected to your SCBA, breathing air until you've completed decon. Once you've given your all, it's time to rehydrate and enter rehab. Don't just walk straight into the rehab area. Take the time to wash your hands, face, and neck with soap and water. Retrofitting an engine with a warm water outlet utilizing the heat exchanger is a realistic method of providing effective hand washing at every emergency scene. If that's not available, disposable wet wipes will do the trick. Why would you risk ingesting, inhaling, or absorbing the very chemicals and particulates you've worked so hard to avoid?
Initially, I was like, I know, wear your air pack. I get it, wear it through overhaul. I get it. But he actually talked about a whole different side of exposure, and it was the skin absorption piece, getting exposed through the skin, and how dirty gear and a dirty helmet and not showering after fires, how that's just prolonging the exposure. So after that class, I washed my gear, cleaned my helmet, and changed my ways completely.
Once the fire is out, wait until the structure is cooled before beginning overhaul procedures. Always wear your full PPE and SCBA during overhaul. When you've been cleared from the scene, take the time to bag up your contaminated equipment and PPE. Make sure the bag is sealed and placed in a compartment that's separate from where the important cargo is, you and your fellow firefighters. Similarly, SCBAs should be kept separate until they can be thoroughly cleaned. Once you're back in quarters, your turnout gear can be washed in an extractor or sent off to a professional cleaning service. Masks should be carefully washed and decontaminated in a manner consistent with the manufacturer's instructions. Helmets should also be thoroughly cleaned to remove all carcinogens and contaminants. Gloves must be washed and dried before being put back in service. These are just a few of the small, simple changes that can lead to a long and successful fire service career, uninterrupted by cancer or other illness. The job of firefighting is dangerous enough, so help each other out to use these best practices and minimize risk of carcinogen exposure so all firefighters can be healthy in, healthy out.
Okay, so the question is, what can you do? And we're going to talk about good, better, best practices. And the impetus behind good, better, best came about when myself and Ed Klima from the First Responder Center for Excellence had a conversation with one another. And the conversation focused around the fact that there are a lot of things that we can do to reduce the risk. The problem is that money in a lot of cases can prevent us from doing all of the things that need to be done. The bottom line is there are things we can do that aren't expensive. They're easy to implement. And as we go through the good, better, best, I want you to think about them as building blocks. What we can do that's good, we get those things and lay the foundation, and then we move on to what's better. And if we ever get to the point, or if you ever get to the point in your department where you can afford to do the best, then move on to the best. But doing nothing is not an option. So the question is, what can you do? And this is a slide of the Nutty Professor that my daughter took at a class I was teaching. So doing something's better is far better than what the alternative is. Budgets, facilities, and personnel, attitudes, and leadership. Obviously, cost for many fire departments can be a factor or prohibit us from doing all of the things that are listed as recommendations. The layout and design of your buildings may be an issue. You may not be able to isolate areas of your building simply because of the way your building's built. I get that. You may not have enough personnel to accomplish some of the things. You may have a very small department and don't have a lot of people to begin with. Changes in attitudes will be needed. You know, early on, 5-6 years ago, when I started this cancer stuff in my own department, I had people, even my son, push back on me about his flash hood until I had him take his flash hood, put it in a bucket of water and let it soak over a weekend. And then when he saw how dirty the water was on Monday morning, he decided maybe his dad knew what he was talking about. And hoods were no longer an argument in our department. The bottom line is, folks, it's going to take leadership at all levels to make the changes in your departments. So let's start off with some of the good practices. Obviously, this one's pretty easy. Wear all your PPE throughout the incident, including your SCBA, even during salvage and overhaul. I know it gets hot in a lot of places in the summertime, and the last thing you want to do is to tell your guys that they have to keep and girls, they got to keep all their turnout gear on, keep their SCBA doing overhaul. You know, if you have to, bring other people into the scene and relieve the initial attack crew and use fresh people to do the overhaul. And I understand, again, geographically, in some places in our country, that may be difficult to do because your closest mutual aid may be 50, 60 minutes away. But we can find a way to make it work. Provide a second hood for your firefighters. I know they're not cheap, but it's pretty easy to do. And let's face it, you know, if you have a smaller department, you're probably not running 5 or 6 working fires in a month's time. You might be, you know, you might have that many in a year's time. So even if you can't afford to buy a second hood for everybody, buy some spare hoods, keep them in the station so your primary entry people have a second hood to be able to use. Use wipes on your neck, jaws, arms, and hands. Pretty easy to do. Now, if you go to the trade shows and you talk to the people that sell the fireman's wipes, you should stay away from wipes that have alcohol in, because the alcohol in those wipes have a tendency to open your pores up, which would allow more absorption. There's some discussion that even baby wipes with lanolin in will open up your skin pores a little more. The bottom line is, if you don't want to use wipes, then be able to do it with some water. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Gross on-scene decontamination. The video showed you, now they call it preliminary exposure reduction, or PER. They're getting away from on-scene decontamination. And while we're on a topic, let's talk about that a little bit. They showed you bagging the gear up. So here in central Pennsylvania, obviously in the wintertime, it gets cold. And I'm not going to ask my firefighters to come out of a building where there's been a fire and it's 13 degrees out, and I want them to take, and have them stand out in the cold and pour water down over them. So the alternative to that, what we've done is we take turnout gear off. When we've been released, The turnout gear comes off and goes into a clear plastic bag. The SCBA goes into a clear plastic bag. All the hand tools and whatnot are also placed in the bed of a pickup truck to be taken back to the fire station. None of the equipment, none of the turnout gear, none of the breathing apparatus is put back onto the rig to be taken back to the station. So really the only thing that's contaminated that's getting back on the rig is the individual in their clothing that they have. We did an experiment with Tyvek suits where we got the largest Tyvek suit I could find that we could put over somebody that still had their turnout gear on. And every time we attempted to pull the zipper up, it would tear the zippers out. So that idea didn't work very well. So, and the reason I tell you to use clear bags, there's a story circulating that years ago at one of the national conferences, there were several sets of turnout clothing that had been donated to some of the hot instructors that were put into garbage bags that weren't clear. And whoever was responsible for cleaning up took those bags thinking they were garbage, threw them into a truck, and they ended up in a landfill. So some people have even said, well, why even bag it up? Well, consider this. If you have 5 or 6 people that are taking their turnout gear off and they're going to throw it all into the bed of a pickup truck, you can imagine what the mess will be when you get back to the station. If you can keep it separated, it's in the clear plastic bags, it's preventing the off-gassing of the turnout clothing, and it helps keep it organized that when you get back to the station, you don't have a mess trying to sort out what belongs to who. The other thing on-scene decontamination or preliminary exposure reduction, and I'll show you some of the equipment here shortly in a slide, is we want to make sure we don't get any water. We don't saturate somebody in the area of the chin and between the chin and their upper chest. We don't want water inside the turnout clothing, because now all we're doing is taking the debris and the contaminants from the outside of the turnout gear and washing them onto the inside of the gear and onto the individual. Don't carry your contaminated PPE inside the cab or your privately owned vehicle. Like I mentioned, take the stuff off at the scene, put it into a pickup truck, and transport it back to the station. Change your clothes as soon as possible and wash as soon as possible after the call. There are some people that are keeping, especially in the volunteer departments, are keeping clean clothes at the station, taking showers at the fire station before they even go home to their families, and they're bagging their whatever clothing they were wearing up and taking home to wash it. If you're doing that, and obviously most of us are in that situation, make sure the stuff's not getting washed with the rest of the laundry. And after it's washed, I would suggest that you run a couple of super hot sanitizing cycles through your washing machine to try to get rid of any of the cross contamination as soon as possible. And then shower as soon as possible yourself, or the acronym that's being thrown around is to shower within the hour. Clean your tools and apparatus, especially after exposure. Let's not put dirty tools back on the rigs. Let's not put dirty breathing apparatus back on the rigs. Limit your exposure to diesel exhaust. Look, I understand that diesel exhaust, the exhaust removal systems in fire stations are expensive. Now, it's become a priority of the Assistance to Fire Grant Program again. It's still awful competitive. I understand that. But do your best to limit yourself to diesel exhaust. Develop, implement, and enforce an SOP. And before I forget, if any of you are looking for an SOP, at the end of the show, I'll provide you with my email address. If you drop me an email, I will send you an SOP that's used by my department that we've been using probably for about 5 years now. So if you develop an SOP and you implement it, you have to enforce it. It doesn't do anybody any good. It's not worth the paper it's written on. If you develop it, tell everybody you're going to use it, and then you don't enforce the SOP. Wash your PPE, including hoods, gloves, and boots. And we're going to talk about that. I'm going to show you some slides here in a minute or two along the same lines. Now you're saying wash your boots. Wash the bottom of your boots. Take a scrub brush with some Dawn dish soap on and scrub down the outside of them. So here's a decon kit that I purchased 3 of these several years ago. The total cost was $78. And as you can see, it's in a plastic tote that has a lid. There's Dawn dish soap. Now, if you look here, you'll see the garbage bags are black. I no longer have the dark garbage bags on the rigs. We have clear bags now. There's baby wipes here, and some rubber gloves for people to be able to use. The total cost for these kits was $78 to buy 3 kits with all the stuff that's in those kits. Here's some wipes. Obviously, you have the fire wipes. You can use baby wipes. I'm not going to get into the debate as to whether or not you should use, the super fireman wipe over a baby wipe. The bottom line is doing something here is better than nothing at all. If you look here on the preliminary exposure reduction, you'll see a 2.5 reducer to a garden hose, a short section of garden hose that's on a reel, and a nozzle that's kept in the engineer's compartment on our engine. The nozzle one here, when I bought it, has like 12 different nozzle settings on it. And someone asked me, why'd you buy something with all those nozzle settings? We all know firefighters like to play. So I figured if I got something with lots of settings on it, I would at least know they're using it because they'd be playing with all the settings on it. This adapter had been on the engine for years. Obviously you can't run the same pump pressure through this garden hose you would with your 1 3/4 hose, but it's a low flow, not a lot of pressure behind you. You don't need the pressure. What you want to do is get the stuff rinsed off. Does it work? According to the studies that have been done, the on-scene wet decontamination reduces the contamination on our turnout clothing by 85%. All right, the preliminary exposure reduction, it reduces that contamination by 85%. And you can see here was 2 of our younger firefighters when we initiated this program several years ago, simply using a scrub brush with some Dawn dish soap, and they're scrubbing one another down and then rinsing one another down with that garden hose that I showed you. Washing your turnout gear. Now, I'm not going to start a debate, and I don't want to argue with anybody over this, but this particular washing machine has been in our firehouse for over 15 years now. And 15 years ago, when I was looking to purchase a washing machine to clean turnout gear, I called an individual who at the time owned a company called Safety Clean. They were a company here in Pennsylvania that cleaned turnout clothing for people, clean and inspected turnout clothing. And I called the individual and said, look, do I really need to buy an extractor? And his comment to me was, if I could find a front-loaded machine that turned at least 1,100 RPM, that I would be able to effectively clean turnout clothing. Now, the argument is, how much do you know? Do you have any idea what you're actually removing from the turnout clothing? What's left? No, I haven't done a study on it. And I don't know that studies have been done on the extractors either. Now, can I wash 4 or 5 sets of turnout clothing at a time? No, 1 set at a time. Obviously, anytime you're washing your turnout clothing, you're taking the liner out of the shell. You want to make sure that everything on the shell was snapped together, the Velcro is all Velcroed together, and that you're washing the shell separately from the liners. The other thing I recommend is that when you run the rinse cycle on your liners, run an extra rinse cycle on it to ensure that you've gotten all the soap out of it, because you don't want the pores in the Gore-Tex being blocked. So this machine, again, my fire department doesn't run 5 or 6 working fires in a month. We're lucky. We're lucky that we only have maybe 4 or 5 a year. Does it take a little longer that you can only wash 1 set of turnout clothing at a time? Sure. Is it the absolute best? I don't know how it compares to an extractor. Some people will say, well, how do you know you're not damaging your gear? We've been using this same machine for 15 plus years, and we've sent our turnout gear out to be inspected, and there's no more wear and tear in it from this machine than there would be with any other. Again, I'm not trying to start a debate. We're just trying to look at some practices that we can implement that are far better than doing nothing at all, especially when you don't have a big budget. Here's the high-tech dryer we have in our fire station. As you can see, it's nothing more than iron pipe that's been put together and a 3-speed box fan that sits at the bottom of it. You hang the stuff here on these hangers. These clips are here so you can take your pant legs and clip them to the hangers and hang the pants upside down. Within 2 hours of turning that fan on, the gear that's hanging there is dry and ready to be put back in service. Apparatus checks outside. Again, back to limiting the amount of diesel exhaust in your apparatus base. If you don't have the exhaust systems, okay, so the pager trips at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're the first one to the station to drive. And typically what you'll do is a driver goes in, starts the rig up and sets in the building, the apparatus bay with the engine running, waiting for the crew to show up. Start the apparatus and get it out on the ramp. Don't let it set in the apparatus bay running while you're waiting for the troops to show up. All you're doing is filling that apparatus bay with the diesel exhaust. Chances are your turnout gear is in that apparatus bay. Now you're coating your turnout clothing with the diesel exhaust. Get the apparatus outside as soon as you can after you get it started. Establish, so now we're going to move on to some better practices. Establish red, yellow, green zones within your station, or hot, warm, cold zones. Again, you may not be able to do it because of the way your building's laid out, but there are certain areas of your fire station where you could ban any protective equipment being moved into. Quit the use of tobacco, including dip and e-cigarettes. Now, this is a tough one for people that are addicted to tobacco. I'm telling you, because I'm addicted to tobacco myself. And this can be a tough one to overcome, but you got to make the effort. Get an annual physical and make sure that your doctor knows that you're involved in the fire service. And at the end of this presentation, if you drop me an email, I will send you a checklist that you can provide to your doctor. So there are that's been created by doctors for doctors. So your doctors can take a look at it and realize that there might be some additional testing they need to do for you. At the end of the day, early detection increases your chances of survival significantly. Early detection of cancer increases your survival significantly. And an annual physical. Up until this last year, I was seeing a dermatologist twice a year because of precancerous growths on my ears and my face, my nose, and other places on my body. And the dermatologist several years ago suggested that I need to go to a dermatologist at least twice a year. And I did. And every time I went, I had another precancerous thing removed from my face. Now I'm back to once a year because a lot of that stuff has been taken care of. Again, early detection increases your chances of survival significantly. Here's a picture from a fire station in Arlington County, Virginia, where you can see they were able to lay their station out. You know, the red zones are high hazards. Turnout clothing's allowed in there. These other areas, the yellow, you can have your turnout gear in, obviously. The green areas, no protective equipment's permitted in any of these green areas. Again, I mentioned it before, get your annual physical. And I think I may have skipped over a slide. There's something I want to talk about when it comes to turnout gear. If you can afford to get a second set of turnout gear for your people, do it. If you can't, work to get a second set of turnout gear for those people who you know by looking at your incident reports are those individuals that are making the interior attack on your fires most times. Fully document all exposures, incident reports, and personal exposure reports. And I'll show you a slide here earlier on that. I just mentioned the 2 sets of turnout gear. I know turnout gear is expensive. I understand that. I know in my own department several years ago, we started to purchase at least 2, if not 3 new sets a year for the most active people, the people that I knew were going to show up and do the interior work. So I started with the top 3. So every year we're buying 2 or 3 sets of turnout gear. This year I've been fortunate. We're going to be able to order 6 sets of turnout gear because we were able to leverage some grant money. And the reason that we started that practice is that it's great to get an AFG grant to buy 50 new sets of turnout clothing. The problem is that they all expire their useful life according to the NFPA at the same time. So now you're back in the same situation again. So if you're able to buy a couple of sets every year, then you've got them in a decent rotation, and you're not, all your turnout gear is not coming to the end of its useful life at the end of that 10-year period is laid out by the NFPA. The mini grants, I know that's not the official term that they use with AFG, might be a good concept, a good way to be able to do that, just to get used a couple of sets or a few sets of turnout gear every year. Let's talk about the clean cab concept. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about the clean cab concept, and I'm not opposed to the clean cab concept where you're paying a manufacturer and all your equipment and your breathing apparatus and hand tools and everything else is kept in an outside compartment, even to the point where the troops aren't putting their turnout gear on until they get to the scene of the incident. If you have the money and the people to be able to do that, by all means, go that way. But let's talk about an alternative to that. If you clean the cab of your apparatus now, and I mean thoroughly clean it, and then you don't allow dirty stuff back in the cab, so you're not putting contaminated turnout gear, breathing apparatus, hand tools, flashlights, any of that stuff back in the cab. And the only person or the only thing getting back in that cab is going to be the firefighter that still has their street clothes on. And then you clean that cab again when you get back to the station, all those hand tools, all of the SCBA, and all the turnout gear is cleaned. We're moving towards a clean cab without having to go to the expense of moving everything to the outside. And I've heard all the debates one way or the other. And all I'm saying is there's an alternative to it. Clean the cab, keep the cab clean. Don't allow dirty stuff back in the cab. You're moving towards a clean cab concept, and you're not spending tons of money to do it. Remove the ice machines and water fountains from your apparatus bay. During some of the studies, they went into some fire stations that had ice machines sitting in the apparatus bay. They took the ice from the machines, put it in cups, and let it melt. And you could see the oil sheen on top of the cup of water after the ice melt. So move your ice machines. I know I drove our president and trustees crazy when I came back from the first cancer symposium several years ago, and I wanted our ice machine moved. It wasn't in the apparatus bay, but it was too close for comfort. We moved it. We had a refrigerator we used to keep in the apparatus bay with bottled water in. We moved it. So another better practice, if you can't afford the diesel exhaust removal systems for your apparatus bay, consider getting some of these screens. They're commercially available, and putting them over your apparatus to try to limit the amount of diesel exhaust that's getting on your turnout clothing. Again, just an alternative when you don't have a lot of money. If you can move your turnout clothing out of the apparatus bay entirely, that's great. If you can put it into a room that's, has its own ventilation system, it's climate controlled, that's great as well. Let's face it, a lot of us simply don't have that kind of money. This is an alternative. Exposure tracking. If you do a Google search for exposure tracking for cancer for firefighters, there's a plethora of tracking systems and methods for tracking your exposures. And it's important to have those exposures documented. So if you have to file a cancer claim somewhere in your career, you're able to prove that you were actually involved with and in a situation where you were exposed to cancer causing agents. Let's look at some best practices. Here's a decontamination unit from the Denver Fire Department, a picture of it that I got off the internet. I know there are other fire departments across the country that have units similar to this, where they have a team that shows up and they do the on-scene or the preliminary exposure reduction on the scene. Some of this apparatus, some of these units will show up. They actually even have spare turnout gear on, so the firefighters are issued clean turnout gear at the scene. Again, if you have that kind of money, go for it. If you don't have that kind of money, then work on the alternatives. Shows a picture of the breathing apparatus being stored on the outside of the rig. Again, I got this off the internet. And again, if you're building a new fire truck, or if you have the compartment space on an existing fire truck and this is something you want to do, go for it. It's a departmental decision. But I go back to my earlier statement about the alternative to a clean cab. If you hog this stuff up at a fire and you put it in the bed of a pickup truck to take it back to the station and it gets cleaned before it goes back on the rig, that's an alternative. Seat coverings. And again, this photograph come off the internet. Now, these are easy to clean seats. Stay away from cloth seats. We have 2 vehicles in our fire station that had cloth seats in because they were commercial vehicles. We bought seat covers that can be put on those seats, and then it can be taken, removed, and thrown in the washing machine to wash. A lot of people will tell you to use something like Simple Green. I found one thing about using Simple Green to clean this material. If you use it full strength, it has a tendency to leave a sticky residue behind on your seats. So if you're using something like that, break it down with a little bit of water to keep your seats clean. Here's a HEPA filter system that's been put on some newer apparatus. Again, if you're in the market to buy new apparatus, I suspect, and this is just a hunch of mine, I suspect that going forward, we're going to see this type of thing become part of the standard, the NFPA standard for requirements on new apparatus in the future. It's just a hunch. Your PPE is stored in a separate ventilated room with protection from UV lights. Ultraviolet light degrades the material on our protective clothing. We even went as far here last year in our station to have an individual come in and put the blackout kits on the windows in our apparatus base so the sunlight couldn't get to the turnout clothing. Exhaust removal systems. Look, if you have an exhaust removal system in your station, use it. And nothing frustrates me more is to walk into a firehouse and see that they spend all kinds of money, grant money or otherwise, to put an exhaust system in their stations, and then they don't use it. Pay attention to your diet. That just makes a lot of sense. Exercise to stay healthy. I mean, I recently said to and I go to a cardiologist once a year because a few years ago I was diagnosed with AFib. So I go to a cardiologist every year. And I had some health issues last year. I lost a lot of weight. I've put the weight back on, but I've put most of it on in my stomach area. Okay. Apparently, when you get older, you store fat in your gut. And I asked him about it, and he said, look, if you can't exercise 5 days, 6 or every day of the week, get 30 or 40 minutes in every other day. Do something other than sitting on your backside and not doing any exercise at all. If you want the golden standard for everything that you should do related to your protective clothing, follow the National Fire Protection Association 1851 on the standard selection, care, maintenance, and protective ensembles for structural firefighting. where you're going to use an independent service provider to clean your turnout clothing once or twice a year, and you're going to have it inspected. And look, I understand there are a lot of fire departments that simply just can't do that because they don't have the extra gear to do it. Find something that works. Make sure the stuff is getting cleaned on a regular basis, inspect it on a regular basis. Look, anybody that's on this webinar tonight can read. Get your hands on NFP 1851 and try to do as much of it as you can yourself. Again, doing something is better than doing nothing at all. There's a new standard that's on the horizon. A good friend of mine from the fire department in New York sharing with me that we'll soon be looking at NFPA 1585, a standard on contamination control. It's in its early development stages, and obviously it'll be released for comment from the public at some point when it goes through its revision cycle. So keep your eyes open for the NFPA 1585. So what do you do if you're diagnosed with cancer? Well, I know what I can tell somebody to do here in Pennsylvania. I can't tell you what to do in your individual states. Here's what I will tell you though. If you have a cancer presumption law in your state, somebody in that state understands that cancer presumption law inside and out. And if you're a chief officer or an officer in the organization, you need to be very familiar with the cancer presumption laws in your own state. So you ensure that your people are doing the right things to be able to be covered if something happens. And while I'm on the topic, if you're a fire chief, ask yourself this question. If a member of your department walked into your office tomorrow or called you at home and told you they were diagnosed with cancer, what would you do? What plan do you have in place to help that individual? Who's going to help that individual's family while they're going through the treatment for cancer? Because we all know that people who are going through treatment for cancer get very sick. Who's going to take care of that family? And one thing I've learned about the fire service is it seems like we have maybe a 90-day window. Sometimes it might go 120 days where someone tells us they have cancer, and the fire service will jump all over it to do all kinds of fundraising to help the family and the individual. And then after that 90 to 120 days, we seem to forget. We move on with our lives. And I can guarantee you, if someone has cancer, in most cases, they're not going to be cured within 120 days. The bottom line is what's your plan in your department to deal with somebody who comes to you and says that they have cancer? Do you know who you can talk to in your state to get information about the cancer presumption law in your state? A great source of help, the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. The website is right here on this slide, and I'll share that with you at the end of the program, and it'll be available in the email that we send out. If you call this toll-free number and tell them that you're a firefighter and you've been diagnosed with cancer, within 24 hours, they will send you a box full of material that you can use to help you and your family. And they will also connect you with somebody who's been diagnosed with a similar cancer to you that you've been diagnosed with. So you have somebody to talk to, somebody you can ask questions to. What can I expect with my treatment? What can my family expect? Somebody that you're able to talk to help you through the process if you're diagnosed with cancer. Don't go it alone. Get some help. Other protections. I mentioned at the beginning of the program that Provident has a critical illness or cancer policy. And our policy, which is called a cancer critical illness policy, can provide up to $30,000 in a living benefit. In other words, you don't have to die from cancer in order to receive the benefit. It also includes a $10,000 accidental death and dismemberment benefit, and it pays a benefit on the face amount of the policy for cancer, heart attack, stroke, or renal failure. If you or your department wants additional information on that, we'll have a link at the end of this program where you can send an email to us for additional information. This shows you where I got some of the material for the program. The time is now. There are no excuses for doing nothing. Start small, build on your successes. Good, better, best. So Sam, I guess we're at that point where we can take some questions.
Yeah, we are. Thank you, Ed. That was fantastic, as always. So right now, Ed Rush commented in the comment section, got on late, so not sure if Ed mentioned, but the NVFC and VCOS put out a great resource on cancer prevention in the fire service, the Lavender Ribbon Report, and he sent a link to it. And I feel like a few or many of the things you mentioned are currently in the Lavender Ribbon Report.
Yes, and I apologize for not mentioning that. And my understanding is that here in the very near future, an updated version of the Lavender Ribbon Report will be available. In fact, I'm going to probably do a podcast with Brian McQueen, who is with the NVFC, working closely with the Volunteer Combination Officer section on updating that report. Shortly after the updated report hits the streets, we'll probably do a podcast with Brian so we can give everybody an update on the report. Yeah. Thanks, Ed, for the heads up.
All right. And then Brian McQueen says, great job, Ed, in the Q&A. So that's it for no questions yet. Anyone else? We seem to, everyone's still on and seem to have watched most of the webinar. So if anyone has questions, now's the time. If not, that's fine too. You can, I'm going to send an email to all of you that attended tomorrow with information about this webinar, information about our podcast that's called Station 1902, where Ed interviews experts in the fire and EMS industry. Also, everyone that's watching right now, we're going to send you a certificate of attendance for being here tonight.
So look, I want to thank all of you for taking time tonight to listen to the podcast. And I realize it's impossible to cover every aspect.
Ed, I'm sorry, real quick.
Okay.
Sorry. Can you go back one slide showing the sources where Ed got his information? Someone asked.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah. So,
thanks.
If you have any questions about tonight's program, or we didn't get to your questions, or if you want a copy of a standard operating procedure or any other information related to this, please feel free to email me at eman@providentins.com. That's providentins.com. You can also find additional resources at www.firefightercancersupport.org and www.firstrrespondercenter.org. The NVFC and the Volunteer Combination Officer section is mentioned by Ed Rush in the Lavender Ribbon Report. In fact, if you email me, if you want a link to the Lavender Ribbon Report, I'll send it to you. For those who registered for the webinar, we'll email you a link to the websites. We'll also be uploading this presentation to our Provident YouTube page if you'd like to watch it again or share it. I'll be sending certificates via email in the next day or two, so please keep an eye open for the email. As a reminder, there'll be a very short 5-question survey at the end of the program. Please take time to complete it. If you have any questions or need additional resources, again, you can email me at eman@providentins.com, or you can send a general email to info@providentins.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So this wraps up another Provident webinar. Please stay tuned for future webinars. September the 27th, we'll be doing a webinar to continue our series on the Drive to Survive with Chris Daly when we talk about braking. And I don't mean break dancing. I'm talking about the brakes on your fire trucks. In October, I'll be doing a roundtable discussion with women in the fire service, both firefighters and researchers, to talk about women in the fire service and cancer and its impact on women in our business. In November, I'll be doing a roundtable discussion in a webinar with several fire chiefs of combination fire departments from across the country. Where we'll discuss why they ended up with a combination department, some of the things they experienced, what worked well for them, what hasn't worked for them. Upcoming podcast. On September the 1st, we'll be airing a podcast that we did with Chief Ron Sarnicki from the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. Mm-hmm. On October the 1st, we'll be airing a podcast with Brian from the Firefighter Cancer Support Network to talk about the programs they offer. November the 1st, I'll be talking with Tom Lewis, and we'll air a podcast on emergency reporting, the incident reporting software, and the importance of data to the fire service. And then on December the 1st, we'll be airing a podcast with the acting U.S. Fire Administrator, Tanya Hoover, and the Superintendent of the National Fire Academy, Eric Gablick, where we can talk about the programs available at the U.S. Fire Administration and the National Fire Academy. And hold on a minute, Sam, what popped up here? Okay, we got that one. You took care of that one. All right.
Yeah.
Until then, please, folks, stay healthy, stay safe for your family's sake. Thank you and have a good night.
Night.